Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to those in the center of the country here. Thank you for joining us today. We have a good topic. I think we've had a lot of interest from our members about cybersecurity. It's in the news every day. So people are starting to become more aware of how it's affecting their businesses and precautions that they may need to start taking. So we've got two great speakers to give us kind of a guide on cybersecurity and ways that you can start thinking about your risks and different things to help manage that. After the presentation, we will be sending out some handouts from both Josh and Jake. And so our presenters today are Josh and Jake Prabanik, and they're with Last Line Cyber Incorporated. So they know a lot about this stuff. They work with companies every day dealing with threats and things like that. So welcome to both of you. We appreciate you being here. And I'm going to just go ahead and turn it over to you, and you can get started.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Amy. We're really excited to be here. Jake and I love this stuff. We love cybersecurity. We were kind of discussing before we even hopped on yesterday afternoon. It was like, what do we really enjoy about this practice area the most? And I think one of the things, it can be an intimidating area because when you think about cybersecurity, there are a lot of different factors that come into play. There's the technical security, right? Then there's the physical security. And then there's also administrative security, your policies and procedures. How are you managing your organization's risks? But one of my favorite things is, especially when we're working with our clients, Jake can attest to this, it's helping them understand that it doesn't have to be so complex. You can really, most organizations need to take a security strategy and build it in pieces. And I think that's something that is really enjoyable for us. And Jake, if you wanted to speak to that, or one of your favorite things about security.
I think one of the fun things about security too is you're a good guy. It's fun trying to be the guy that's keeping the bad person out, and kind of as Josh pointed out, it's not so much just the IT person. Cybersecurity is it's a company-wide responsibility. So everyone gets the chance to fight the bad guys per se. So again, really looking forward to discussing things today, and hopefully a lot of you guys gals get a lot out of this presentation.
So what we wanted to do today is discuss, essentially set a framework for what is happening in cybersecurity right now. We wanted to go over some things that everyone just needs to consider in terms of protecting their environments, and then helping you actually how to think about developing a strategy that is the right fit for your organization. Before that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about who Jake and I are and what we do at Last Line Cyber. So this is a very general overview. So we do three things primarily. We offer cybersecurity training, and we customize training. So we build custom training programs, and they could be in situations like this, where we're doing it virtually. We have a class, we make presentations similar to this, and learn what the organization wants to know about cybersecurity. And we really help folks get the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that are necessary in order to protect their organizations. Our consultancy practice is primarily focused on risk assessments. So helping organizations determine where their cybersecurity risks exist, what their most valuable assets are, and then what is the best way to protect them specific to your organization and your business goals. Security testing goes into our consultancy as well. Now, security testing would be things like phishing simulations, and we'll get into phishing. So testing your employees to see how would they respond if a phishing email were to land in their inbox, if an email that was trying to trick them into giving information to whoever might be sending that email lands in their inbox, what will they do? The other thing is vulnerability scanning. So going into an organization using a technology package that essentially scans the environment, your servers, databases, infrastructure, your firewalls, routers, computers, and tries to find where all the technical vulnerabilities are and how serious these vulnerabilities are, so that you can determine a plan to mitigate them in whatever schedule works for you. Obviously, the quicker, the better. So a little bit about Jake and I. So I'm a Duquesne University graduate. Jake is a Penn State grad. Between the two of us, we have experience in small to mid-market, enterprise, small and mid-market cybersecurity operations and strategy development. We both are educated in cybersecurity, went to school for this. I'm an ISO 27001 lead implementer. 27001 is a cybersecurity framework that organizations can get certified to, along with a couple of other certifications. And I really love this stuff. I've been doing it for a while. I've been helping organizations maintain risks. I've helped build cybersecurity strategies for multiple organizations, along with in-house as well.
Thanks, Josh. And a little bit about myself, as he said, and if you can't tell by my sweater here, if you can see it, I'm a Penn State grad. So I majored there in information security and with an emphasis on risk, information security risk analysis. So that's really where a lot of my focus now lies. I'm a certified risk management professional, currently working on what's called the C-Risk certification, which is pretty intensive risk training, but obviously it's very good. But outside of that, I definitely have experience, like Josh said, with enterprise in small to mid-level cybersecurity operations and strategy, specifically with GDPR and privacy regulation conformance. I've started in the field out of college doing incident response, so actually responding to cyber incidents and things like that. So as you can see listed there, we have a variety of experience in a variety of cyber fields. So
before we move on, I'd also like to say, once we wrap up this discussion today, you'll have the opportunity to speak to the both of us in the breakout sessions afterward at the tables. So if there are specific things that we don't cover today, you please feel free to reach out to us and ask us questions. As was mentioned before, we also developed a little resource package that you can use. There's a lot of great links to articles we find, blogs that we like, actual configuration guides. So we hope you find it helpful. So what we promised you today was a guide to practical security. Like I said, we wanted to start off with just a general overview of what the state of cybersecurity looks like today.
Thanks, Josh. So no, cybersecurity is no different. So at the end of each year, there's a bunch of reports that are put out there that review what was seen over the course of the past year. So on this slide, we wanted to pull a couple statistics that stood out to us that we thought would also, stand out to folks here in the audience as well. So, the first one there, 85% of data breaches or just cyber incidents in general in 2021 involve some form of human error. So when we're talking human error, we're talking a number of things. So that could be an individual clicking on a phishing email, clicking on a link in that email, or downloading a malicious attachment that may have been attached to the email. It could be poor password hygiene by a user, or it could be a user misconfigured an application, or your firewall may be misconfigured. So. But the main takeaway here is most of the time behind a successful cyber attack is some form of human error or a fundamental breakdown by, an employee or a contractor that, led to a successful attack. And going into that second bullet point, one of the reasons why human error a lot of times is, involved in these breaches is because social engineering is nowadays, and it has been for quite some time now, it is an attacker's favorite tool. So we're going to get into social engineering a little bit more here in a couple slides, but social engineering is, they're trying to hack the human, they're trying to hack human nature and how they're trying to trick humans, the intended targets, into doing something that benefits the attacker. That's the entire goal of social engineering. So moving on, ransomware. These attacks are continuing to impact organizations across the world. So you may be hearing ransomware a lot in the news, but you may be surprised to see that only 13% of incidents involved ransomware. So the thing there to remember, though, is that number continues to skyrocket. So it was lower a couple of years ago, But another thing to remember with ransomware is while only 13% of incidents may have ransomware, the impact of it is pretty catastrophic to an organization if you do get hit by one. So, and nowadays with ransomware, attackers aren't just encrypting your files. Now they're actually taking an additional step that before that, they're compromising your network, they're exfiltrating all kinds of data from your network, and then they're dropping ransomware. So not only do you have to worry about ransomware response on your network, but because that data was exfiltrated outside of your network, it's technically considered a breach. And then you're going to have to worry about was personal data compromised, what kind of company data was compromised. So attackers continue to refine their skills, and ransomware is no different, and it's just going to continue to become worse.
Actually, and I just recently, as early as this week, I saw, and it's a new type of ransomware that actually doesn't ask for a ransom. I believe it was happening in Israel, and it's called Moses Staff, and what it does, it's actually kind of scary. So there's no ransom. There's nothing. It's literally a malware that has decided that the hackers have generated just to screw over an organization. You can imagine the implications in cyber warfare, especially where organizations might be working on defense contracts or something of that nature, sensitive to government agencies. So just going in, just locking the system down and not giving any means of decrypting that data. And so, again, these attacks are evolving. They're getting different. So it's something to consider, and it's something that we always need to stay on top of, especially when we're working with organizations.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, so building actually on one of the points you just made, so, not all attacks may be financially motivated. Some attacks may be trying to send a message or just try to cause some kind of physical damage. A great example of that is in early 2000s, there's a virus called Stuxnet that was actually designed by the United States and Israel, but it was designed to actually cause the nuclear power plants in Iran to technically fail. So most of the time, like we said, 80% of the time, the attacks are financially motivated, but they may just want to make your company look bad. They may just want to deface your website. But again, because of how successful they are at getting money, I mean, we're starting to see record prices for ransomware payments. The pipeline, I think the ransomware payment was just under $5 million. And I think the highest record, the highest payment for ransomware occurred this year. I think it was upward of $40 million. So if you think about those numbers, it certainly can be enough to cripple an organization and potentially enough to put them under. So you can move ahead, Josh. So what we have here is our wall of shame. So you definitely do not want to be up here. If you did, it means you got hacked. And in this case, these are organizations that just got hacked within the past year. If you look at a decade ago, I mean, you're talking maybe one or two newsworthy hacks a year. This is just, we just picked ones that we wanted to put up here. This isn't all of them. I mean, there's other names that you would definitely recognize that have been breached in the last year, but we just didn't have room to fill them up here. But so going back to the Colonial Pipeline and some of the points that we made on the previous slide, the attackers were able to compromise the Colonial Pipeline network because one of their users was reusing passwords from multiple sites, and those credentials got exposed on the dark web. So the attackers found the credentials on the dark web and said, I'm going to try to access Colonial Pipeline's network using these credentials. And what do you know? The user didn't change their credentials since they were leaked years prior. And attackers then were able to compromise the Colonial Pipeline network. And I mean, we've all seen the pictures. I mean, people are lining up with their gas canisters just trying to get gasoline. That's all because a user didn't have good password hygiene.
Something I wanted to bring up too, and I'm glad you brought that up, Jake. So this isn't just a hack that's affecting now an organization. These attacks are impacting our daily lives. We're experiencing them in our day-to-day lives, right? So they have effects that span further than just within the organization itself. And that's something to really keep in mind in thinking about your organizations too, and your partners in your supply chain, right? Who are you sharing information with? And if you were to be compromised, or if one of your clients, or if one of your partners or vendors, suppliers, whoever it might be, is compromised, what are the ramifications of that? And so it's something to consider. And when you see all these names up here, it's right. These are like the big names. We're going to go into some other situations here too. But and Jake, I'll let you pick up on that with a few other instances of what's been going on here.
Thanks, Josh. So, yeah, just from a high level, to start the year, right underneath the Colonial Pipeline, you can see SolarWinds. So that was, at the time, considered the most covert and intensive breach of all time. So if you look right to the right of that, the name FireEye, they were originally the ones that detected the breach, and they are the industry leader in cybersecurity. But they were compromised because of SolarWinds. And so what SolarWinds is they're an IT. They help organizations manage their IT networks. And there's an attack type called a supply chain attack. So what these attackers did was they just went after the big fish. So, well, I guess these are all big fish, but SolarWinds has tens of thousands of customers around the world that utilize SolarWinds tools. And so they attack SolarWinds and compromise SolarWinds. And then for a particular SolarWinds tool, they were able to distribute a malicious update file to tens of thousands of their clients, the customers using this tool. And once that update file was deployed to tens of thousands of organizations and the news broke, tens of thousands of organizations were left scrambling because the attackers essentially had an entry point with that malicious file to get into their computer networks. So I can tell you from experience in just doing exercises that if you're ever in one of these situations where you're the one compromised and breached, it's not fun. You're in a war room setting. People are cursing. It's all business ethics might be out the door. You have the CFO, CEO talking there. If you're talking ransomware, you may have to have a negotiator on the line negotiating with the attackers. It can be an all-out scramble for an organization. So, and a lot of times that may be because organizations just aren't prepared to respond to one of these types of attacks. So, having good cybersecurity hygiene from the start can really make, responding if you're ever hit with such an attack, any kind of cyber attack, having a good cyber hygiene from the get-go can really, save a company a lot. And I'll turn it over now to talk about some of the other points up here.
Yeah, so usually in these presentations, organizations like us, and we're no exceptions here, are quick to point out, the low-hanging fruit, right? The big guys that we can pick on. However, there are certainly smaller organizations that fall victim to cybercrime constantly, every day. And so I just wanted to pull up a few of those. So there's an organization called the Florida Healthy Kids Corporation that was compromised this year. So these are all attacks that happened in 2021. So their database, so they work to help children in the state of Florida have a good life, right? They're a fairly ethical and organization, but they were compromised, right? And the type of information that was compromised is really sensitive stuff. So we're talking not only like full names, dates of birth, email addresses, social security numbers, but wages of parents, guardians, alimony, child support, royalties. I mean, this is stuff that who wants that about themselves leaked? And so the thing to really think about here is, what were they doing that led to this breach? And I will tell you that 9 times out of 10, these breaches occur because organizations don't have the basics down. They don't have a strong password policy. They're not implementing multi-factor authentication. They don't understand how what vulnerabilities exist in their IT infrastructure. They're not managing security patches, and the list goes on. But there's a lot of things that organizations can do, essentially like a checklist of things that is going to highly increase and improve your ability to defend against malicious attackers. another one, the Oldsmar, Florida water treatment. So this was kind of interesting. You might have heard about this in the news where hackers were able to gain access to industrial control systems that control the input of certain chemicals that are used for water treatment into water. And what happened is, and it's pretty scary, right? Potentially life-threatening levels of certain chemicals were put into the water supply because the system that controls the flow of these chemicals, it was compromised. So an attacker could just control the system from like sitting in a room like I am, and they could potentially, again, affect multitude of human lives. And this was not a big water plant. I mean, this was a smaller water plant, but again, it was stolen credentials. They were using weak passwords, not using multi-factor authentication. So we'll stop picking on Florida. This is a really recent one. Missouri Department of Education, they had a application on the internet that had social security numbers of teachers, 620,000 educators. Their social security numbers were visible on the internet, just in the HTML code. And so now the Department of Education is forced to pay for credit monitoring for 12 months for all of those people that were involved. So that is a substantial amount of money. I mean, you're talking millions of dollars here. But again, not like a huge corporation, not a massive international conglomerate. Anyone could be a victim. And there's a small business that actually called me recently. Their social media page was hacked. They have amassed, 50,000 followers over a period of time, and they're gone. Like that was their marketing tool, was their social media pages. And again, weak passwords. She was using her daughter's first name and her birthday as the password. And she used that password for all of the social media accounts. And now her outreach, right, her public facing persona of her organization was gone. There's no recouping that. Especially when you're talking about Facebook, it's very difficult to get your page back once an attacker takes control over it. So these are just some examples of, of course, there's the big newsworthy events, but there's also, if you dig deeper, there are smaller organizations getting hit by this on a daily basis.
Thanks, Josh. So as promised, we're going to talk about social engineering a little bit more. So social engineering, like we mentioned on one of the first slides, is one of an attacker's favorite tools. So what social engineering is you're trying to hack the human. So there's typically three ways that they try to do this. One is phishing, another one is smishing, and then the last one is vishing. So you may be familiar with these, you may not. So we're going to go through each one, but the main goal of these social engineering attacks is to trick the target into doing something that benefits the attacker. So, they try to prey on the human fear aspect. If I don't click on this link to update my information, then I'm going to lose access to this account. Or, if I don't click on this link, then I'm not going to get my package because it's saying I got to verify my address. So attackers understand this, so they try to prey on that, and they'll craft their messages to the intended targets to prey on those emotions. So the first one we wanted to go to is and talk through is smishing. So these are scam texts, and you may be getting a lot more of these this time or nowadays than you may have a year or two ago. I know I get these all the time, and they're just annoying. But so a couple of things we want to cover here, and it's a common theme throughout smishing and vishing as well. But a lot of times you'll probably be getting these from an unknown number. So one of the things to always remember here is if you're getting a message from an unknown number with a link or with a URL in it, and it's asking you to do something, just delete that message immediately. If you look at some of these examples that we have up here, going back to some of the topics that they may try to trick you with, is if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, your Apple ID is about to expire, and if you don't want to lose your services and data, you need to click on this link. And if you look at that link there, it's pretty suspicious looking. What's bit.do? I mean, that doesn't look very legitimate to me. You would think it would come from apple.com, right? Especially if it's coming from a number that you don't know. Same with the one above. So it's a suspicious looking link, redcross-mass.ca. And one thing to keep in mind here too is, attackers like to, especially with COVID, there's just a huge boom in cyber threats, but attackers like trying to craft their attacks based off of real world events. So COVID was a huge one. They maybe not a real world event, but around the holidays, attackers love just developing holiday themed. Here's a package. We're all ordering packages around the time of year, so they're always trying to pick a theme that would potentially trick us. So a lot of times too, if you get an email or a text with something that seems too good to be true, like with a lot of times in life, no, it probably is too good to be true. Unfortunately, we're not all a Nigerian prince's relative with millions of dollars waiting for us. I wish, but that's not the case. So just always remember, if you're getting an email or a text from someone that you don't know, where it's making a request that you're not familiar with, it has a suspicious link, you don't know who it's from, just completely ignore it and delete it. And I'm just going to cover one more thing here, Josh. Sorry for making you go back and forth. But,
you're fine.
One thing to remember here, and it's a common misconception that because you're on a mobile device, it's lower risk if you click on the link. But unfortunately, that's not the case. With COVID, we use mobile devices probably for work more than we ever did, and attackers know that. And if it wasn't working, then they wouldn't continue to be sending these smishing texts. So, again, these are just as dangerous to an organization as a phishing email, because if a mobile device gets connected and you bring that mobile device back to your corporate network, that malware can spread throughout the computer network and lead to other cyber issues for the company. Moving on. Thank you, Josh. So phishing, you may be most familiar with this one. These are scam emails. And whenever we talk about the 85% of cyber incidents that are a result of human error, a good amount of them are probably phishing. So I was talking to a Fortune 500 CISO, which is the Corporate Information Security Officer, and I was discussing with him what are some of his greatest concerns, what are the biggest risks to his organization, and his number one threat in his eyes and risk was phishing. So from there, his explanation is, you can invest either as a small or large company, tons of money into all kinds of firewalls or antivirus, but it can only take one individual to cause all of that to not really matter. So if a user receives a phishing email and they click on that link or attachment in the phishing email, that firewall and antivirus may not really matter at that point. So, we're humans, we all make mistakes, and attackers know that. That's why they're constantly targeting us. So a couple of things to look at here to identify phishing emails and things to avoid, like SMS or the smishing attacks. If it's from a source that you don't recognize and it's asking you to do something, and if you don't do it, then ignore it. You'll see. So this is saying it's coming from the Office 365 security admin. But if it's coming from Microsoft, if it's saying it's Microsoft, the message should be coming from Microsoft, not Office365.net. If you look at this one as well, again, a lot of times attackers don't know your name. They probably just got your email address off some, off the dark web or from some data breach and threw you into, a big group of intended targets. So there's going to be a generic greeting there. You may have a hello user, dear customer, just a hello, no greeting at all. So a couple of things to look out for. Josh, we want to go to the next one.
Yep.
So again, dear online banking customer, from Bank of Americans, your account has been locked. A lot of times, again, if you don't do this, if you fail to update your account information in the next 24 hours, you'll require to go to the branch to reestablish your account. Well, we're all busy. I'm sure none of us really want to have to worry about.
So again, one of the things that we just wanted to focus on here was that for any of these types of messages, there's always a gotcha, right? And it's really trying to make, they're using things like scarcity, right? Making you feel like you have a limited amount of time to do something, or else something bad will happen. And we see these in a lot of these different examples here. There are also, it's not always coming from, a message is not always coming from a organization that you might recognize. It could also look like it's coming from someone internal. Jake, I was just picking up kind of where you left off there. But I was just talking about how you could see an instance where it looks like a message is coming from someone within your organization. So of course, Jane Doe, John Smith. This email is saying that the organization had technical difficulties with payroll. All right, so that's a hot topic. And for new updates on this issue, please review the following insight, this following website. And so this link is probably going to ask you for your payroll credentials, like what you use to log in to get your money. And so that's another thing. They're trying to prey upon your emotion of, I don't want anyone messing with my pay, right? And so the attacker knows that you care about being paid. So they're trying to get you to click on that. And they make a use case, they make a situation. And if it looks like it's coming from Charles Thomas, who might be your accounting payroll coordinator, you might be likely to click on that.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, and along those lines too, and another common type of attack we'll see too, where it's even harder to detect, is what's known as a business email compromise. So you may have seen this before, where one of your vendors may have been compromised, and they in turn there's an malicious actor that injected themselves into a conversation where it looks like it's actually coming from your vendor or whoever, saying, hey, this invoice needs to be paid. Here's new bank account details. Please make payment to this bank account. So again, those are a little different than this, but we continue to see those more. So again, that gets into a little bit more of like supplier security and things like that. But it just shows you what these attackers are doing these days to pull off these successful attacks.
Yeah, and so Jake, I think we can probably just quickly review these next two. You might see things from Amazon. Again, it's trying to prompt you to click here to update your address due to a system error. You got to make sure if you have messages like them, you check the sender address. Is it actually coming from Amazon? The same things with Netflix. You can tell right up here, Team Netflix. It looks like it's coming from Team Netflix. This is called the display name. You can make this look like whatever you want. But if you look at this email address right next to it, what is that? It's a bogus email address, and you just have to be cautious. You always have to be careful. And the last thing we wanted to talk about was something called Vishing. So this is voice phishing, right? Trying to lure you over the phone. So what happens here is an attacker picks a target, and in business situations, what will usually happen here is they might peruse their target's website and try to find information about them. So, for example, they might be targeting a program manager, this Billy Powell guy here, to call on the phone and try to elicit some type of information from them that they can either use to gain access to an account, or information that they can use for an attack in the future. They might even go and try to find the person on social media and try to find more information about them, so that when they call, they sound more official. If they're calling from, let me go forward here. So they might call from a multitude of well-recognized organizations, or they could act like they're calling from a family member, or they are a family member or a distant family member. Whatever the attacker chooses might be most effective for their victim. But the idea here is that they're getting some sort of pretext. They're understanding who that person is, so that they can make a case that sounds inviting to them to do what they want, to send a wire transfer, to provide account login information for the Microsoft or their HP or Apple account. Or if they're calling from the IRS, right, the IRS about something, they might be trying to scare someone into giving away sensitive financial information. So they call a target with some information about them. They try to make their case sound really convincing, and they hope that they can convince the target to share information with them, and sensitive information, so passwords, bank account info, personally identifying information, maybe some information about their computers. So this is something that you need to keep into consideration. If someone just calls and acts like they're calling from HP, hey, what model printers do you have? Which model computers? Which system are you on? We're doing a customer canvassing. They want to see if you are behind on your updates, or if you have an older, unsupported machine that they can then take advantage of, because they can just Google your company and find out where you are and then try to attack you. So voice phishing, phone scams, it sounds like, well, this is, how does this have to do with cybersecurity? Well, the way in which they're using technology, especially now, they can make it look like they're calling from anywhere. They can make it look like they're calling from Apple support or the IRS, using phone spoofing. So targeting or masking their actual number that they're calling from, and making it look like it's coming from someone else.
Yeah, one of the crazy things too that they can do today is go back to the Vishing, and I know Josh and I were talking about it yesterday, but artificial intelligence is becoming a pretty big risk in the cybersecurity world. But attackers now are able to actually, I forget what the exact company was, but through a Vishing attack, they were able to use artificial intelligence to essentially replicate the voice of the CEO. So through the phone, it sounds like it's actually the CEO's voice. Now that's the type of threats that are, in the future we're going to have to be concerned with, and it's crazy.
Yeah, it's really crazy, and that actually goes into, and I'm going to touch on that point again in this next slide here. So what we kind of wanted to do is cover some cybersecurity myths and debunk them if we can, and if you'll come along with this journey here. So the first myth that we wanted to talk about is that concept that it's not going to happen to us. Unfortunately, that's not the case. There's a surge of cybercrime, especially after COVID. These events are happening constantly. Everyone has email, so 92% of malware is delivered via email. It's a common attack vector. This next number here is kind of startling. There's almost $3 million lost to cybercrime every minute.
Yeah,
it's called the Evil Internet Minute.
It's crazy. And then one other note here too, going back to the emails, is like it says, 92% of the malware is delivered via email, but there's 3 billion phishing emails sent per day. So yeah, there's probably a good chance, if there's 3 billion phishing emails sent per day, that at some point, if it hasn't already, it's going to make its way to either your personal inbox or your corporate inbox.
No doubt. As Jake was saying, new technologies, they give way to new types of crime. So that AI, the case was actually last week. It was discovered that a firm in the UK, an energy company, was targeted, and the attacker was calling from supposedly the parent organization, their CEO, emulated the voice, got a wire transfer approved to the tune of almost $250,000 to an offshore account. They said it was a vendor. It needed to be done. And so the guy was like, yeah, it sounded like it was him. He was like using the same language that he usually uses, and it sounded like him, same accent. That's the kind of stuff that's happening, and it's pretty terrifying. But 2025, we're estimating that, and this number keeps going up. A couple of years ago, it was not even a couple of years ago. Last year, this number was like 5.4 trillion. It's now gone up to 10.5 trillion is at stake due to cybercrime annually by 2025. This isn't just ransomware. I mean, this is recovering from incidents. This is, of course, those ransomware payments as well, but it's also those wire frauds. It's also the cost of having to, like in the example that we brought up before, having to pay for credit monitoring. That's really expensive. So a lot of different things go into that dollar amount, and it's just because everything's interconnected, it just keeps going up.
Yeah, so myth number 2 that we like to cover is that just having antivirus plus firewall means that your network is completely secure and that you have nothing to worry about. So that is awesome, and that is a fantastic start. I mean, if you have a firewall and antivirus, I mean, you're doing a great job to start with your network-based threats and malicious file downloads, things of that nature. One thing to consider there, though, is there's still a lot of things that have to be taken into account when it comes to firewalls and antivirus, such as that these still require routine maintenance, and a lot of times these solutions also have vulnerabilities that don't get addressed. A lot of times these firewalls probably have a default username and password that have never been changed. It's probably admin and password. A lot of times attackers could know that. If they can scan, do a network scan, see what type of network devices you may have. There's lists of out there that are, well, here's the default username and password of this specific device. And if it's internet accessible, they can just, try it. And what do you know? They can have access to your firewalls. So again, they require maintenance. They have to be properly configured. Again, this can play into that human error aspect that we talked about earlier. Misconfiguration of antivirus or firewall gives you a false sense of security. You may think stuff's being blocked, but it's really not. You may think viruses on a computer is being detected, but the virus definitions haven't been updated in 4 weeks because of misconfigurations with the solutions. So again, these are very technical solutions. So if you don't have someone that is very IT savvy, it may be difficult, and again, it can be difficult for just the average person, average worker to handle. So there's a term called defense in depth here. I think Josh is going to cover that here as well. So this is something that we preach to every client.
Yeah, so firewall and antivirus, this should be part of a wider security strategy. And really what defense in depth is it's preventing an attacker from reaching your resources, right, your data and information, using multiple layers of security, so that even if an attacker were to breach certain levels of security, you would still have controls in place, right, protections in place to block them at some point. So you have multiple points that could fail, and as long as a couple of points succeed in blocking an attack, then you're protected, or you have a much higher likelihood of being protected. So in this example, right, so they might get past the firewall, they might get past the antivirus, but if you've been keeping your systems up to date and patched, and they're trying to go after a certain vulnerability within a computer or a server, or whatever the resource they're trying to go after, if you have a good vulnerability management system, then you're probably going to be okay at that point. Now, you can mix and match all of these different cybersecurity controls, right? These methods of preventing attacks. But the general idea is that you want to have layers. You want to have a depth of security protections that prevents that even if one of those things fail, you have other things in place to protect your organization. What you don't want, and Jake and I were discussing this yesterday, is a single point of failure. So if all you have is antivirus on your computer and your antivirus does not stop a malicious file from being uploaded and then being spread across your network, and you don't have anything else in place to prevent that from happening, then that's a single point of failure. So it needs to be a deeper strategy. You need to have more controls in place: firewall, antivirus, vulnerability management system, cyber awareness, and education, telling your people not to click on links, not to get the virus in the first place, right? It looks like I'm going to run through a couple of these things because I want to get to the end here because we're running a little bit short. So the next myth I want to discuss is that if you have an IT department, if you have a managed IT services provider, then they're going to cover security, right? Well, that's great. It's always fantastic if you have IT resources, especially in-house. But if you're outsourcing that as well, it's great. But you might be missing something. So Eric Cartman is going to illuminate us with some things to consider, right? So things that you want to think about if you're handling IT internally, or if you have a managed service provider, how are they providing the appropriate levels of security relating to the assets that you have and the value of the assets? Are those being protected appropriately? And if you're working with a managed IT services provider, are they fulfilling their contractual obligations? How often are you talking with them and monitoring to see, if they're handling backups, are they taking backups at the frequency? Are they testing the backups, right? Do they have a method to alert you if something is happening within your network, or if a machine or a device fails? So one of the documents we're sending is actually a question bank of things to just discuss with your internal and external stakeholders. But you want to understand, how are you protecting our environments? Because usually managed IT services providers have some form of protection, but you really need to understand as business owners what these companies are doing to protect you, and if they have additional things that you haven't considered, or if they're not able to provide those to you. Well, that's a good discussion point, and it's a good idea to maybe talk to them. Hey, can you do this, or do we need to go with someone else? And then for your internal IT departments, or if you just have someone that manages your IT for you, you have a friend or something, you're a smaller operation, and you just have a computer guy. How are they determining your security strategy? Are they actually taking into consideration your environment and trying to help you define what do we need to do in order to protect ourselves and protect our most valuable assets? This next one, Jake, we can touch on this because the cloud. So cloud apps are secure, and Jake's going to go into this in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, so the cloud really changed the game of how computing works. It's fast, it's convenient, it makes working from anywhere a lot easier. But with that, there's also a lot of drawbacks as well. So in general, yes, the cloud is secure, but there's a caveat there, and that is that while these are provided by a vendor and they have all these security features, a lot of times those security features either aren't properly configured or aren't configured at all from the get-go. Out of the box, I can tell you that Google, their Google Workspace Suite, Office 365, they have great security features, but you actually have to go in and enable a lot of them. So, and again, a lot of the issues with cloud applications, and which bites a lot of companies, is their permissions managed. How are they being managed? Are after an employee leaves the company, have they gone back into Salesforce or Dropbox and removed their Dropbox account? Or is this individual that had access to Dropbox whenever they were employee 3 years ago? Did they still have access to Dropbox 3 years after they've left the company because no one went back and cleaned up the accounts? So when it comes to security, yes, they are secure, but there's always configuration that happens. And the things we always recommend is for every cloud solution, especially if it contains company data, we're talking, if you're using Google Workspace for email or Drive, Google Docs, always enable MFA. That same goes for everything you see listed there, Microsoft 365, SharePoint, Exchange. MFA can solve an organization tons of problems. I mean, if going back to the Colonial Pipeline, if they didn't have multi-factor authentication enabled, so once that password was discovered on the dark web by the attack group, if they had multi-factor authentication, whenever that user or whenever that attacker went to log into their VPN, the actual Colonial Pipeline employee would have received a notification on their phone that said, "Hey, are you trying to log into your account? Is this actually you?" And if that was configured, then the entire Colonial Pipeline could have been avoided. Again, this is a lot of times, almost all the times by default. It's not enabled in these solutions because a lot of times people view it as an inconvenience. But obviously I'm a security expert, so I think more of the inconveniences come after the fact. If you don't have MFA enabled in your Colonial Pipeline, you have to deal with everything you were dealing with still. I think that's a little more inconvenient than having to enter a 6-digit code. That takes 2 seconds. So that plays in the next point. You always have to dedicate time to properly, configure these systems. Again, they have great security features such as MFA. External, if we're talking email, you can flag emails that are originating externally to make your employees aware that, hey, this is originating from an external contact. Be extra cautious with this. These are all great features that are there, but again, they take time to configure. So that's just another thing we always recommend. And then again, with the cloud, a big thing about the cloud is, they say the downtime, there's not going to be any downtime. Well, unfortunately, that's not the case. One of your cloud vendors may get hit with a cyber attack. What what are you going to do as a business if you can't access Microsoft Office 365 or Google Workspace? How are you going to continue with your business? What's your recovery plan? So it's critical that you have a contingency plan and recovery plan if you do have a cloud service that becomes compromised. Because if you don't, you may not be able to recover from losing that data.
Yeah. And so the next thing that we wanted to talk about was essentially, how do you create a roadmap for improving cybersecurity within your organizations? And really, it comes down to conducting a cyber risk assessment. It's the best thing that you can do to help your organization understand what risks exist that you need to address and what is your plan for addressing them. So what we wanted to do is go over essentially the 5 steps that we develop for our risk assessments and how you can kind of go through them yourselves, or you can, of course, bring us in and we'd love to work with you to help discover risks and learn how to manage them. So the first step is essentially identifying and defining your stakeholders, your business drivers, right? What makes the organization money? What are your most valuable assets? And what do you need to do to protect them? And that's a lengthy process, right? Just discovering your assets and identifying what there's this baseline security criteria that we have there. So that's understanding what do your clients expect from you in terms of information security. If you land a contract with a certain client, and you're sharing information between the two of you, what types of security considerations do you have to have in place from a statewide perspective, right? You need to understand your legal ramifications. If information is compromised within your organization, what are your obligations by law that you have to fulfill if your information is compromised? Also deciding, how are you going to assess your organization and what level of risk will you accept? Again, you want to discover and document everything that you possibly can. Assets, workflows, your infrastructure, any current security controls you have in place, who's responsible for information security, and what have you learned from previous incidents? Then you want to start analyzing things. You want to start understanding, okay, now we understand our assets, now we understand our workflows. Now we understand, what we have as an organization and what we need to protect. What are the risk scenarios we need to keep in mind? What's the likelihood and impact of a risk occurring, and how are we going to remediate those risks? And so this is kind of just like a general overview of the risk assessment process. Essentially what you do is you assess your risks on a scale of likelihood, on a plane of likelihood times impact. And so what you see here is we're using a scale of 1 to 10 in this example. And when you go through a risk assessment process and you start identifying and then ranking those risks within your organization, assigning values to them, the line that cuts across both axes there, you can see that that's a moderate level of risk. It's between 1 and 10. And so you're willing to accept any risks that's under that level, that ranking that you've put to it. Then your goal, your strategy becomes identifying all of those other risks and deciding how are we going to bring those risk levels down to a level that we can accept. And you can do that by treating them through a multitude of different security controls. But your goals are really with risks to reduce them, avoid them, share them, or retain them. And so for a risk like this one that I have circled here, it looks like it's a little bit higher. So say this is rated 10 as a likelihood and 8 as an impact. If you're multiplying those, that's a score of 80 in your scenario. And you decide then that you want to, we want to reduce this risk. So we're going to implement some type of security control, maybe data loss prevention or enhanced email security to protect ourselves. Whereas, for this one that I have circled here, the impact of the organization is less, although the likelihood's a little bit higher. Maybe you're just going to say, okay, that's something that we can deal with in Q4 of next year. It's not going to have a big impact if it happens, but it helps you develop that strategy. You need to review, the controls that you want to put in place to protect your organization. You need to review, okay, well, are these improvements actually going to address the risks that we're doing? And you want to make sure that your process is repeatable. And what this risk assessment process really does is it helps you budget too. If you, instead of just investing blindly into security technology or having someone sell you security technology, you're able to actually tie investment into security technology or into technology in general to your risk assessment and make more informed decisions. And finally comes to the implementation. So now that you've identified everything you need to do, creating that project management structure around that. So your security strategy essentially is the results of the risk assessment. You understand them, you create objectives from those results to try to reduce those risks to an acceptable level, and then you implement those enhanced security controls. And that could be physical, technical, or administrative. And so now I think is probably the time where we're going to go into the rooms. Sorry we went a little bit over here, but we'll be sitting on the tables there, and we can't wait to speak with you. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to us.
Yes, so we will end this session. Jake and Josh will go to the lounge and their tables. This is a great opportunity. I think after what you've just heard, I hope all of you are a little scared and a little nervous about, boy, are we, taking care of these things and protecting ourselves. So great opportunity to sit and chat one-on-one with Jake and Josh if you have any questions or you want some more information about what they do. So we will end this session, and then just when you see the lounge, just click on that table and you will join. It's ideal to turn on your camera and microphone so that you can interact that way. But you can.
And thank you so much, Amy, for letting us do this.
Yes, thank you guys.
A lot of fun.
A lot of great information, and like I said at the beginning, we do have some handouts that we will send out afterwards, so you can look for those. But okay, so we're going to end the session, and feel free to join the tables.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.